Hello and welcome once again to episode 75 of Code Completion. We're a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So, say you just started a new job. How do you stand out without overdoing the amount of hours you're working every week? In general, not doing more work than you really need to be doing. So doing more quality work than quantity work. And how can you go about excelling yourself and pushing yourself forward in that process? Because standing out is all about having more great decisions than bad ones, really. At the end of the day, if it all balances out, then you're not really going to stand out any more than anyone else. But if you do want to make a good impression, then it's up to you to make a bunch of good decisions, which is hard for someone who may not have been doing this a whole ton of years. So I figured, as I saw a lot of people getting their first jobs on Twitter, I figured what a better time for unsolicited advice from us of how to go about doing that. My number one thing is always going to be get comfortable with Git. That's the easiest way to kind of raise yourself up in a way that most people are not going to expect. And we all see Git as this very complex thing that's hard to master, and it really isn't. It's something you truly can learn in a week or two of just reading a book on it and going over concrete examples and exercises to get comfortable with it. And I'm curious to know what you think, if it's just me that has this opinion, Spencer, or if you also agree.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's a huge thing, just because it's such a obviously essential, but fundamental thing where, for example, if you're working on a bunch of bug fixes for the day, you're just picking a bunch of tickets, you're switching branches, you're making pull requests, you're having to merge and develop when other people have merged their pull requests in. And so it's this constant thing that you're doing multiple times a day, potentially. So being able to do it well, and I'd say also just, I guess being able to do it well. I really like that you said it's quality over quantity, where in a lot of these things, especially in a first job, right? No one's expecting you to have everything mastered. They're not expecting you to do all of this amazing work that you're, for lack of a better term, not qualified to do. But I think Git is one example where you're probably expected to know how to do it at a basic level. But like Dimitri said, if you can get really good at it, knowing how to already make pull requests, maybe you're for example, I only used GitHub before I got this job. But at work we use Bitbucket. Luckily, making a pull request is as easy as finding the create pull request button, and the process is the same. So a lot of this information is transferable. But had I not had that information beforehand, then it would have been hey, how do I merge my code in? And that, that takes time away from someone else. And I'm sure that they're happy to do it, especially if you were a junior. But having, again, that fundamental knowledge of something that you'll be doing potentially multiple times a day is, I think, huge in general. Not to mention getting into, sorry, real quick. Not to mention getting into, being able to deal with merge conflicts and these things that maybe are a little bit more pernicious to deal with, but ultimately you're going to run into. I think that, I guess, really the name of the game here is being as independent as you can be, while also, especially if you're a junior, realizing that they're not expecting you to be 100% independent. And I don't think any developer really is.
Yeah, as you said, it's not so much that you need to be excellent at what your main job is, which is programming, which you're basically, if you're hired as a junior or you're hired as a mid-level engineer, you are not necessarily expected to be know everything. Nor are you expected to be able to solve any problem. And the skills that like we'll go over in this episode, I feel like are skills that are adjacent to that, that anyone can be good at. It's all about good work ethic more than anything.
Yeah.
And Git is just about like knowing how Xcode works, like knowing where the buttons are, knowing how to be effective, knowing how to command click to find like where code is located. Like all of those things are not about being a good problem solver and knowing how to fix any problem with code. And as a result of that, there's something that anyone can like immediately be comfortable with, right? So I think that's the magic of Git, is it is just a tool that you can learn how to be comfortable with just by practicing with it on your own. So as you mentioned, like a PR in GitHub is the same thing as a PR in Bitbucket or a MR merge request in GitLab.
Right.
Like they all use different terminology for the exact same topic, and it's something you can do in your own pet projects. Like instead of committing everything to master or main, like go ahead and make a branch, go ahead and make a PR, go ahead and write up your PR, go through that exercise, because in that process you'll have to review your PR and you will find issues. So like there's no better way to like really get good at something, get good at something than to practice it. And like this is one of the easiest things that you can practice on your own, and you can make situations for yourself where you're going to have merge conflicts. Like start a branch doing one feature and say like, okay, hold, I just found a bug, let me pause this branch, make a new branch for that bug, and then go ahead and commit that one first. And as a result, your second branch is going to need to be rebased, or you're going to need to merge stuff. So that's like, there's no better practice environment than with yourself. Because worst case, you can go ahead and like fix it and you're not damaging other people's code, right? My favorite like technique, just duplicate the folder in Finder. Like make a copy of it that you know where to copy that code from. You don't need to know how to use the reflog and all that to like undo a rebase that went wrong. No, you can just make a copy before you do something that you know is going to be terrifying in Git. And keep doing that until you're not terrified by it, right?
Absolutely. I think that's like one of the best parts about Git is you can essentially simulate, these complex or maybe tough situations by yourself. You don't need someone else to do it. I mean, heck, you could make a private repository on GitHub, and so no one would see any of the work that you're doing, but you can not just be committing on, locally, but you can be interacting with the remote repository and be making these pull requests. And I mean, a lot of the times I'll, commit something, push it, and then when I'm ready to make my pull request, you can see the diff of what you're looking at, what's going to be submitted in the pull request, and I'll be like, oh crap, I didn't even mean to commit this file, and I just happened to just, gloss through it when I was committing in the first place. So being able to know like that there even is a diff that you can look at before you actually submit the pull request is nice. And just finding these tools that help you, I guess, improve your workflow. But just knowing what tools are available, I think is kind of a huge thing, if that makes sense. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that pre-review really helps you hide your sloppiness, right? You can go ahead and see like, oh, I have 4 work in progress commits in a row. Like there are commands in Git to interactively rebase and rename those commits and squish them into one, and really make things look more professional, right? It takes 5 minutes at the end of working on a feature to go ahead and rebase off of main, because main changed in between. So you just have your commits on your PR, not your old commits and then a merge and then your old commits and then another merge and then your old commits. Like you can clean that all up so that way you only have something clean to present. So this is like a proposal that you're making to the rest of the team, right? You're saying, hey, I think we should add this code in. You want to make that look the best it can, and your team will respect you for doing that work. Another great way of doing this is in your PR, like include a screenshot of before and after. How do I get the before? I just made all these changes. Just switch to main. Just switch over to main, take a screenshot of, or a screen recording. It's super easy in the simulator now. Command R. You might have done it accidentally as you try to build and run and the simulator was active. Yeah. So you can record a quick thing, drag that onto your PR. It will upload. And then switch back to your branch, record that same thing with the fixed behavior, and then go ahead and drag that over as well. And then you can go ahead and show, like, hey, this PR has this tangible difference. It's not just like a bunch of changes to the view controller and constraints that no one really knows like what the change is. Like you can directly go ahead and see it, and then guess what? People are going to be a lot happier to review your code as a result of that, because it's going to be a lot more clear what exactly it's doing, right?
Yeah, I even yesterday had a great example of, I think like a very, I guess, constructive PR, where a lot of the times, you just list out the things that you changed. But there was this one thing that I was trying to kind of communicate some information to the user, and I wasn't quite sure. It was going in an alert controller, and I wasn't quite sure if it was necessarily the best format. And so what I did was exactly what Dimitri said, where I took a screenshot so they didn't have to comb through the code, but they could see like an actual working example with the strings that get interpolated and everything. And in my pull request, the comment, I said, hey, I'd like feedback on this. I'm submitting this code, but if there's a better way to do this, let me know. And my boss came in and showed me kind of a better format to do this, especially with localization and stuff. And so I thought that was I don't know if I'm really communicating it well, but I think pull requests can be maybe a little bit scary at first, where you're kind of like, especially as a junior, where you're like, please take my humble code, accept it graciously. And it's more of like a conversation. It's more of a conversation or a dialogue, and saying, hey, this is what I've got. But also like one thing that's huge is don't be offended when someone comments on your pull request and says, hey, can you change this? Or they reject it and say, do this instead. They're just looking out for probably potential bugs in the future, and they want to make sure that the code works in general. So don't take it personally, I suppose, if that makes sense.
And you can always ask, like, why? Like,
yeah,
can you
absolutely.
Explain? And you can ask why in a non-condescending like way. You can say like, hey, I want to understand, like, why is this better? Like, I made the change, but why does this improve things? If you don't understand, because that will help you be more effective in the future if you understand the reason as to why you're making a change here or there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So good stuff overall. I mean, Git in general, kind of isolated as your, within just your own work, is crucial, but also the collaboration tools that kind of get extended through, GitHub and in these remote repositories and stuff are just good to practice. I think a huge thing, like Dimitri said, is making sure that you're maybe at the very least, if your pull request is well written, if that makes the title and the comment of the pull request is well written, I'd say the commit messages probably should be pretty good as well. But at the very least, make it into like this coherent message saying, this is what I changed. And, most of the time that's all you need. But like I said, the cool part is you can add screenshots, like Dimitri said. You can, like I did yesterday, start a conversation and say, I would love actual feedback on this. Will you please check this out and make sure that it makes sense, right? Because you're one person, and even probably as a senior, I'd assume, Dimitri, there's things that you don't maybe know 100% are the right thing. And you need to get feedback from someone that is not so close to the code that they can't see potential other issues.
Yeah, and everyone has, like, you can't know everything. So everyone has, like, deep dived into one topic or another, and they are exceptional at that, and may know nothing about something else. Like, Git is an an excellent example of that, because there has not been a team that I've joined where there's not a senior developer that has no clue how Git works. Like it's just part of joining a new team. There's going to be someone who knows a ton about programming that knows nothing about how to do something well in Git. And it's entirely because like they never needed to like push themselves in that regard. So they never learned it. So you coming in as a junior that does have like very good concrete Git knowledge about how to do things like a rebase, how to go ahead and rename your commits, how to navigate a complex merge conflict. Like if you are able to do all of that, you are already going to be a prized member of the team, because most people are going to be like, they're going to be scared of even learning what might take them a week to learn, which is the most surprising thing to me, as to like why people resist kind of learning this. They're just more intimidated than anything. So it absolutely is like one of the easiest ways to impress in a new team on a new job. I did want to follow up too. When you're making your PR, be concise. I think I mentioned this briefly, but if you come across another bug while you're fixing something, like A, write it down, B, make a ticket for it, and then tackle it later. But don't necessarily just fix it along with what you're doing. Like, if your PR does not have a concise message of like, hey, I'm working on just this one thing, it's going to be more difficult to review afterwards, because whoever's reviewing is going to be like, okay, what does this piece of code have to do with any of this? And they're going to be confused. Whereas if you submit a separate PR while you're making your main one, saying, hey, I fixed this little thing that I ran across, then that is going to be merged in instantly, and no one's going to think twice about it. So if you can, like, that is tremendously useful to other reviewers, and it's going to lower the resistance they have towards reviewing your code. And they might prefer to review your code over someone else's code, like if there's a bunch of stuff to review, because yours is going to be easier to review as a result.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I guess as the final bookmark on the Git conversation here, review other people's code. Like,
yes,
as the newest person to a team, like, a code base is intimidating. There's a ton of stuff that's already there. You have no clue how any of it works. The easiest way for you to start getting acclimated to code is to get acclimated to the new code coming in, right? So every PR that comes in, even if you don't understand all of it, go ahead and read through it. Go ahead and ask questions, like say, hey, how does this impact this other part? Everyone knows you're new, so it's totally fine to ask those questions. And especially in that context, because they can go ahead and reply in line, and it's completely asynchronous, not necessarily taking up too much of people's time. So that is a great way to really get comfortable in a new code base when it's often intimidating at first. So just kind of work on that thing that they told you to work on, but at the same time, anytime a new PR comes in, like, be involved. Even if you don't understand it, like, ask questions. Maybe spot something that is like potentially off. Like, you can directly start contributing, even if you didn't contribute any code yet, because you're still kind of understanding the area that you're set to be started on, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember exactly that kind of same hesitation when I started, where the app is huge. There's so much, I mean, hundreds of files, and I just don't understand anything that's going on. But looking at pull requests, sometimes there was, a print statement that didn't need to be there anymore for debugging, or there was like a to-do comment, and you could just even comment like, hey, did this get fixed, or should this to-do be removed? And even that, is constructive in itself, just for cleaning up the code, and it also shows that you're trying to understand the code at the very least. You're not scrolling through the PR just to say, oh yeah, looks good, and then approve it, but you're taking the time to read the lines and make sure that there's nothing glaringly obvious, I suppose, if that makes sense. And you'll get more familiar with it as time goes by, but I'd say even from day one you could start reviewing pull requests and not have the same hesitation that I had to do that.
Yeah, and if you're making a PR and it's not complete, like you didn't nail every single thing and you identified the things that you didn't nail, like as long as you mention them in the description, or even better, make a ticket for all the things you didn't do yet. Like, yeah, I didn't do unit tests yet. I don't understand our unit testing infrastructure. I'll tackle that soon-ish. Here's a ticket for it so no one forgets. That is way more valuable than someone else pointing out, hey, where's the unit tests?
That's huge, yeah.
So, like, anyone can identify what they're missing. And it sounds odd to point out, like, the flaws in what you just worked on. But being upfront about that means that you recognize that those flaws exist. And two, you have a plan of attack to kind of make them better, right?
Yeah, you're not... I guess it just shows... I don't know, foresight, I suppose, in saying, or at least like you said, recognizing maybe you don't have everything, but pull requests can get really unwieldy sometimes. So something that we're trying to work on is making sure that if you have some story or some bug that is massive, it could probably be broken down into smaller, less complex parts. Just for sanity's sake, both for PRs and for UX and everything, UX, QA, and just kind of getting things down to sort of lowest possible, well, maybe not lowest possible, but a reasonably bite-sized bit of kind of work to both fix and test and everything like that. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, definitely. So moving on past Git, because I can talk about Git for hours as I have in the past. Another great way to kind of impress without doing much work is to document your code. And this can be as simple as just writing documentation headers for methods, explaining what the method does, not just like retyping the name in a slightly different way, but making sure that is more complete for all the work that you touch. Is going to leave a good impression, because that means that, one, you are noting down all the aspects that you didn't necessarily think of, you didn't necessarily think was important to keep around long term, but you did anyways, means that future you and anyone else on the team will understand what your code is doing. And this goes further into like line by line comments for something more complex that you're doing. If it's not immediately clear why you're doing something in a certain order, outline that order. Go ahead and like help the reader along to better understand what the code you're trying to write is doing. Now, that's not an excuse to not write good variable names and stuff like that. Like,
sure.
Use them in conjunction. Don't repeat the same terms. Use different terms to expand like a reader's understanding of what is going on.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, where in like the method documentation, right, you don't just kind of exactly regurgitate what the title of the method is, but try to explain it in a different way and kind of get a different perspective or just way of thinking about what the method is doing, or just be more in depth as well. I think inline comments are nice, and obviously you don't need to do it for every single line of code, but if you do have something that, like, for example, I can't remember exactly what it was, but about a month ago, I'd say there was some variable that was doing some math, either with time or file sizes or something, and I couldn't, off the top of my head, exactly figure out what each number kind of represented, but there was an inline comment that said, like, this is I don't know, the amount of time times whatever. I don't know. I can't exactly remember. But it was nice for me to easily recognize that it was like actual legitimate math instead of some random numbers that were just, being put into a result. I don't know how to explain that well, but
think nice. Of if you have like 5 times some variable plus 0.3 times this other variable, and you're like, what's the 5, what's the 0.3, what are these two other variables? If you have a comment where you outline the formula. It's A times B plus C times D, where A is this, B is this, C is this, and D is this. And if you outline that, it's going to be way easier for someone that's, well, reading that to go ahead and know how to best interpret it, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example.
Yeah, so once again, like documenting your code is something that is a skill in itself. Like you need to learn how to write and how to communicate to be able to do that effectively. But it's something that you can practice on your own, because you will, in your own project, run across some code that you wrote 2 months ago and have no idea what it's doing. But if you documented it, you might have an inkling of a better understanding of what it's doing. And if your documentation was just like off and you still need to spend another 10-20 minutes to really understand it, then you can fix that documentation to better include like what you needed to rediscover, and be cognizant of that, because then you can go ahead and use what you learned there for any documentation that you write in the future. So it's something that just practice makes perfect. And like one of my favorite sayings is practice makes permanent. If you don't try to make improvements while you practice, you're gonna be stuck in that old habit that you keep practicing. So do try to improve along the way to get to a better place, because if you just practice without making any changes, then you're not really going to be better at it.
Yeah, quality practice.
Mm-hmm.
My piano teacher always said perfect practice makes perfect, which kind of now seems like an oxymoron, but I get what she was getting at now. Um, and kind of in our notes here, we it says if you deal with something complex, write about it, and I think that's both in the documentation sense of like inline, but also um, if you have so like my boss, I think, was working on something with like a rendering pipeline. And that's like way above my pay grade, but he did some really cool, he made we use Notion. So we made, kind of a more long form documentation, but it's got graphics on, how it deals with transitions between two clips and everything. And it was very, like a very good reference to understand this very complex thing that I definitely don't understand, but could get a pretty good grasp on. And I think that's like the biggest thing with documentation is it's helpful not for you now, it's helpful for you in the future, but also for everyone else as well. So like the amount of time that you can save just between your entire team, if they ever need to touch that code, is huge, because then they have some reference that they can kind of get a jump start on their understanding, to be able to dive into the code a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of what kind of we're talking about and what we will talk about is it comes down to like being proactive, I suppose, and not waiting for someone to tell you to do it, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, you don't know what you're going to work on in a month from now, so you can't really be super proactive about that. But if you are proactive about, well, I mean, Git's kind of a daily thing. You kind of have to do that. But like being proactive about documenting your code, that would be awesome.
No one's going to ask you to do it. But if you do
Yeah.
it, people are going to notice.
Yeah, but if you're like, oh, hey, I just worked on this entire feature, here's some documentation in Notion, or again, at the very least, you're documenting in line, you're organizing your code well and everything. That's huge. I mean, that just shows, again, being taking the initiative and really putting yourself out there to say, I could have just wrote some really bad code that was, or maybe not bad code, but I could have not organized my code, and I could have just kind of said, yep, it totally works. Have fun, QA. But if you write documentation inline, great. If you write documentation, maybe you tell QA how they can test this more effectively, or whatever right steps that they need to do. There are a number of ways that you can be proactive and not, and that doesn't mean you're going over your 40 hours a week, but it just means that you're making the best use of your time that you can while you are working. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
I'm necessarily getting the point across, but just
Yeah, so
making sure.
Yeah, it's even something you can do before you do the coding. So say your day is just
Mm-hmm.
starting. You're about to learn about push notifications. No one on the team knows about push notifications. No one's added it before, but we need to add push notifications to the app. Someone needs to go ahead and learn about it. Go ahead and start a document in Notion or a markdown document in a documentation folder of your repo, and start taking notes. Start outlining your idea, how you're going to go ahead and implement what you've learned from other things that you're researching. Make a design spec that's going
Yeah.
to, or an engineering spec that's going to really outline how to implement this feature. And as you're writing the code, modify that with any changes that need to happen, but you already have an outline. You know exactly what you need to do. It's been outlined for you by you. You have all your notes, and those notes can then be shared with everyone else. They don't just sit in your head. You don't need
Mm-hmm.
to like remember them afterwards. Like, okay, what were the steps I took? Um, so there are so many like use cases for this that, as Spencer said, like a complex rendering pipeline is an excellent example of this. Your code is not going to outline that. The code is going to change over time. But if you have uh, a complete vision of like how this should look with no code involved, then you know what to aspire the code to be able to do in the future. If you make changes to the code and it doesn't match up with that, then you can raise some alarms and say like, hey, this is breaking our spec. Our spec was designed to do it this way, and this no longer matches that. We should either A, notice that that's a bug, or B, update the spec accordingly and rethink the design accordingly. Like oftentimes rewriting a feature like that is something that people might take months to do, or it could take a
Mm-hmm.
week. If you have all the engineering spec'd out, you have all the thinking on paper, that can be something that's very, very quickly done, if you do know exactly what you need to like do to get it going and getting it in the same place than it was before, right?
So along the lines of like being proactive is, I guess, being not afraid to like take on new things, if that makes sense. Like getting outside of your comfort zone. I think that's been a huge um, help for me in learning the code base, but also it's been a really cool thing to. If you think that you can do something, like my boss will sometimes say, does anyone want to take on X feature or whatever? And it's kind of a larger thing than just like a quick story or a bug fix, but it's, a little bit more involved. Like that number pad, or I was working on like a new UI for loading up our automatic backups of projects and stuff. And I think being proactive and showing that you want to like learn about the code base is more than like, yeah, I'm here to, fix some bugs and do some stories, but like it was cool to learn. I mean, I learned a bunch of Swift UI with this new UI, and that was cool because I hadn't touched Swift UI in 6 months or something. Um, Not to say that I am the best and I am always proactive, but I'm just saying I think that's been something that has helped me as a developer grow is being willing to do new things and getting outside of that comfort zone. If you think you can do it, it's within the realm of possibility. It's fun to continue to learn things, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that thing is.
No, definitely. And like no one's gonna blame you in that process for if you say, "Hey, like I would love to work on this. Can someone be like my buddy to work on this?" And
Yeah.
that like you don't just be there for me to like bounce questions off of, be my rubber ducky, like get some advice, like get someone involved to pair with you, that they're not going to be focusing on this, but and they will be like your point of contact, and it'll be a lot easier if you ask and then like someone says, "Hey, I'll do it," than if like you just randomly poke different people and they're like, "I'm not in charge of this, like leave me alone, I'm working on my own thing."
Yeah.
Like that it's easy to like fall into that trap of like people might think that, but more or less everyone's more than willing to help out someone new that's joining their team to get acclimated, because then it means they'll be more effective.
Yeah.
So if you proactively like say like, "Hey, I want to do this, I know nothing about it, can someone help me out if I get stuck?" And then someone says, "Hey, I'll do it," then you're in a perfect situation to tackle something new, something that you are maybe unfamiliar with. Maybe the someone that said, I can help you out with that is an expert in that part, and they can guide you down how to do it properly. So maybe you create a draft PR which just has your branch on it. Like you didn't even write up the PR yet, but you can say, hey, can you look at this? Is this the right way of going about it? And they say, no, 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 you need to do it this way. Then you can go ahead and course correct immediately. Rebase, no one sees the bad code anymore.
Right, yeah.
So there's definitely great ways to go ahead and do that super effectively.
Yeah.
On the topic of being proactive, one thing no one is ever proactive about is writing unit tests. And
You're right.
And it is somewhat unfortunate because they can be super useful for certain things. Like, yes, for a view controller, the look and feel of like where the buttons are, I cannot agree more. Like a unit test for that is not the best. But if you do write unit tests that will go and test functionality, like of said render pipeline, right? To keep using that excellent example, you should have unit tests for that. In fact, you're maybe not going to even have a UI to test that properly while you're writing it that first time, in which point the unit test will be like an excellent way of testing all sorts of different scenarios. What happens if we start with this? Let's just write a quick test. And if you write your code to be testable in that way, you're going to get a lot more out of those unit tests than you would otherwise. So once again, it's something that takes like experience to know like when and how to do well, but it is also something that as you do it more and more often, you get more and more comfortable doing it, right? Another easy win, I would say, is like as you're joining the code base, like notice little things. How are people aligning stuff? What kind of naming conventions are people using? And just acclimate to that. Don't force your opinion necessarily. Just go ahead and say like, okay, I noticed everyone's using 3 spaces. I think this is very, very wrong, but I'm not going to even point it out because the whole project is using 3 spaces for tabs. So just go ahead and go with the flow. Don't introduce 4 spaces. Like, once again, be proactive about noticing and adjusting your preferences to go well with that. If you notice like new lines don't have any spaces on them, and that is something that is consistent throughout the project, then go ahead and like follow that rule for that project. If there's a linter in place, this makes it extra easy and less argumentative. And it's something that doesn't take very much effort. It's more of an observational thing. Like observe, then react to something, rather than like just doing and then being told. Always feels like you stepped out of your comfort zone, you felt good, and then they got pushed you right back in for something that doesn't matter in the end, which is generally like formatting and stuff like that.
Yeah, both I and others have had questions about code style. A lot of the code is consistent, but as we're like moving into writing more Swift, for example, there are a couple things that just maybe haven't been clearly defined. And so I and others have brought up, I'm in this situation, like like the easiest one that I can think of is like, if you have a guardlet and the else is just a return, do you put it on the same line or a new line? Super easy, but want to be consistent or whatever it is. And we've had conversations, and I think it ended up in, I don't think we had it before this, but we now have a style guide, which is great because that kind of clears up the error, and you're just like, oh, okay, cool, I'll follow this. But I think along the lines of code style and just kind of in general is, don't be afraid to ask people, especially as a junior, especially as a mid-level, and I think probably especially as a senior as well. Like, it doesn't matter. Like Dimitri said earlier, you're not the master of every domain in the app. You might be, kind of the expert in one place, but if you're unsure about something, it's definitely better to kind of get the general maybe consensus or just knowledge of someone else. So asking for help is, I mean, I think I've talked about this in general, but I think the community in general, but also, probably, hopefully within your company as well, is a safe place for you to ask questions, and you don't have to feel judged about like, oh, why are you asking this? You should know this. But hopefully you can feel comfortable in asking for help when you get stuck with something, or as something as simple as what should the style be on whatever this part of the language is.
Mm-hmm. And you might be pointed to a style guide that you didn't even know existed, which can help you be better at that. One of my favorite things about like asking questions like that is finding out when no one made a decision, but like something like a linter just enforced anyways. You can go ahead and say like, hey, this rule seems stupid. So for instance, one of those was if you use triple slashes for dot comments, in Xcode by default, it will use a proportional width font. And what that means is you'll have like more readable text that's not in monospace for prose. And I love using those to document the code in between, because then it's super clear what's a comment, what's not a comment, based on just like how wide the characters are. And your eyes just like can glue to either one like variation, like all the code that's in different colors, or the other variation, which is all the text that looks different. And you can go ahead and read through that very effectively. Now, the linter that we were using, by default, it was like, hey, you're not allowed to use dot comments inside the method body. And I'm like, this is a stupid rule. So I brought it up and I said, hey, everyone, I think this is a stupid rule. We should change it. And everyone's like, yeah, sure. Like, no one had any problem with it, because no one was necessarily using that aspect, because it didn't matter at the end of the day. Another stupid rule is like line limits. When do line limits come up? Well, like, sure, you might have a very tiny screen, but most of us have like 27-inch screens. Like a lot of us, except Fernando,
Except for Fernando, yes.
So like most people have their editors to wrap, which means that you're never gonna even hit these issues to begin with. And then like at the end of the day, you're gonna have some documentation that is gonna be a lot better as one line, because then when it reflows as you change the width of your editor, like that's going to be a lot easier to read. Whereas if you insert arbitrary line breaks and then you make your editor too small, now you have like broken lines all over the place. And none of that makes sense. So a linter is not absolute. It's just trying to play by some very basic rules. And you like feel free to break them as long as you have a good argument for it. So like don't necessarily think that just because a linter is in place that nothing can change. It absolutely can. And you bringing up, like, if you bring up a rule that makes sense, let me try to, I can't think of one, like, off the top of my head. But say someone sets a rule in place that you shouldn't check if count is not equal to 0, you should use dot is empty. Like, that's a code that makes sense, and you think that, I want to be able to do this. Don't necessarily like think about it before you bring it up. Make an argument for why it should be a good idea to break one of those rules. Or another one is like explicitly unwrapping optionals with exclamation mark. Say if there's a rule in the code base to not do that, there might be a good reason. Maybe they want you to always guard let those and then fatal error if there's an issue, so that way you can go ahead and know like what should be done if that assumption is not met. So think about why someone might have, like, put yourself in their shoes, why they might have made that decision, or ask. And if you ask first and then suggest later, that's often a lot safer to do, because then you can get some input first before suggesting the change. But that's also a little bit dangerous, because you might get some retroactive thought process that's coming in where they might not have had an opinion, but now they're forced to have an opinion, so they're making one up, which like it can get in your way. So there are different nuances to go about here, but don't necessarily think that a linter is absolute. It can absolutely change. There are many good reasons why it should change, and And if you can, just stick to the style of the project in general, then you're gonna bump heads with a lot fewer people that way, and that's going to make it a more pleasant experience in the long run. Until something really does get on your nerves, and then you can go ahead and suggest like, hey, I really think we should change this. One great example of that is Xcode by default, if you have a long list of arguments, if you were used to Objective-C, you might have put a line break after every argument, and that will align it with the parentheses in Swift, which will make things have a lot of big empty blocks of space on the left, and everything will be over to the right of the editor, which means that if your editor is too small, namely in PR reviews, everything is going to be like hard to read as a result. Spencer, you're probably used to this alternative way of doing it from server-side Swift, where instead of putting the new lines after every argument, you put them before every argument so the arguments align to the left. So like say you have an init with 5 arguments, you say init or my type open parentheses new line, then you're going to be aligned to the left, just indented by 1, and you have your first argument, comma, new line, second argument, comma, new line, third argument, done, new line, and the parentheses is on the last line all on its own, and that makes like a block of text. And that is a very different format than what people are used to, but it lends itself very well to Swift, where you have lots of arguments, lots of chained, nested things, and it works quite well in that context. But because it's something that the server-side Swift community has kind of come up with on their own, and then the default Xcode style was something that Objective-C developers on iOS were just used to for a very long duration of time, it's still taking some change to like convince everyone that that's the better way to do it, just because like you end up with a lot fewer long lines and a lot more easily read larger blocks of code.
Yeah. Yep. I think a lot of this is just like if you think it would be better that way, like you said, like if it makes reading pull requests easier, then bring it up. And that's another example of being proactive is all of this conversation about, you know, if you feel like there is a reason to have the ability to force unwrap something or whatever it is, you're being proactive and you're kind of trying to, obviously you're not doing it just to be proactive, but you think there's a legitimate benefit to whatever you're going to bring up.
It shows that you care about the code base.
Yeah.
Like to butt heads on stuff like that or like on how to implement something properly. And if you really think that there's like a downside to something that someone is doing and you care about it, like, yes, you might be disagreeing, but it's useful to point out that like you're disagreeing not because you think you're right, but because you care about where the code base is going. And it's hard to notice that in the heat of the argument. But it is something that is important to remember and to point out, like especially when you're not part of that argument, to kind of like settle things in a way that you're not attacking another developer for the way they think something should be done. You're really just caring about like how to best improve things.
Yeah, and bringing this back to kind of this is all really good information, I think, in general, but especially, you know, if I'm kind of assuming here that this is maybe your first developer job, you know, you're a junior or whatever. These are all things that you may run into quickly or you may not, right? But a lot of maybe you, instead of saying, oh, I think the code style should be this way, you could say, why is the code style this way? And again, you're asking good questions. You're trying to draw out like the institutional knowledge that these people with more experience than you have, and you're trying to improve yourself, but also, you know, in that process you could come up with a better solution or something. Just because you're junior as well doesn't mean that you can't have these conversations, and I think it's important to feel like you have the ability to bring things up if they need to be brought up.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
No, definitely.
So
and on that topic of communication, another great thing you can do that's like code adjacent completely is just communicate what you're going to be working on. Say when you're going to be picking up a new ticket. Like it might seem like superfluous because like, hey, I assigned myself the ticket. Doesn't that say everything? Well, no one's watching that ticket. No one is gonna like notice that something is changing there. But if you in Slack go ahead and say like, hey, I'm gonna pick up this ticket, like that is an excellent point in time for someone to say like, hey, I have some thoughts. Let's discuss them. And they can then go ahead and share them before you start writing any code rather than after you wrote your PR and things are now incompatible with the way that they may have wanted to tackle that. So like it's an easy little thing just to like communicate your intention, but it is very worth it in the long run, I think.
So this may or may not be a controversial take. I'm not sure. But we have a very healthy stand-up meeting every day. And I actually find it to be very, very helpful for that reason of being able to communicate what you're doing. And we're really good about, taking less than 30 seconds a person, and it goes by in, we have it at 11:50 and I'm out to lunch before 12 every day. So it's always a very healthy, quick stand-up, but there are always times that, not always, not every day, but there are often times that, someone will say, oh, I'm working on this ticket that, this is what it is. I'm working on some bug. And I've gotten, Slack messages from someone saying, oh, I saw that, you might want to take a look at this or whatever, just kind of as an offhand, but you don't have to say, oh, I'd love any feedback that anyone has, but oftentimes it's kind of unprompted, like, oh, I saw that the other day, here's some information that might help you. So communication's good in whatever form you have, whether it's in a stand-up or like Dimitri said, just in your developer Slack channel or whatever, could be huge. And again, letting people know what you're working on, but also getting good help or information from other people.
Mm-hmm. And especially if your stand-up is ineffective, like if you're the new person on the team, you have no ability to change how stand-ups are done.
Yeah.
that is someone's opinion that they like enforce, and that's just the way it's going to be. However, if your stand-ups are ineffective, meaning they do take more than 30 seconds, as Spencer said, like a side note, a stand-up should be something that's super short, gets to the point of like what you did yesterday, what you're working on today, and then move on. You're not discussing how to implement something. You can do that after the stand-up. Once everyone has gone, let other people sign off, and then like tackle those issues. Like say, hey, Spencer, can we stick around to talk about X? And if anyone else wants to talk about it, like stick around as well.
You're not holding up the entire team.
Yeah. I have had like weekly meetings where it's just 40 minutes of, oh, let's go through like these tickets one by one that impact one person each. And it just takes so long. And then at the end, it's like, okay, let's air out a week's worth of like stuff that we've been working on. And that takes minutes each. And then by the end of it, it's like the amount of time that I was needed for that was less than maybe 2 minutes out of the entire hour, and it is draining. That's why people say they hate meetings, is because it just feels like you lost a portion of your time. It's not that you could have been working on for this job. It's you literally lost a piece of like you in that process, and that like kills people little by little, death by 1,000 cuts.
It's literally this could have been an email or a Slack message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in those cases, especially in those cases, like do communicate over Slack, like saying like, hey, like I'm going to start doing this. Let me know if anyone wants to help out with it. Because if you don't have that quick stand up in the morning where it does take like 30 seconds to go like over everyone, then you have no visibility into whatever anyone else is doing, even though you went through that hour meeting. Like throughout the week, it's just like, who knows? And two, like no one knows what you're doing. Like it's just kind of an unknown as to like what everyone on the team is doing. So you can be extra effective by communicating those intentions separately. But if you do have one of those stand-ups, like be clear, be concise, don't stick around don't ask questions as to like how to fix something. Just say like, hey, yesterday I did all these things. Like if any of those impact you, I'm the person that changed them. That's basically what you're saying. And today I plan on working on these things. Like if any of you have thoughts on any of those, let me know. That's what you're basically saying in that process.
Asynchronously.
Yeah. Don't let me know like right now. It's just like putting a little bookmark or a little flag for that other person to go ahead and sync up with you. And then move on to someone else. That's like how to use that most effectively. And yes, although it might take like 5 minutes 5 days a week or 10 minutes 5 days a week, like yes, that may add up to an hour, but you're gonna feel like you're wasting everyone's time a whole lot less in that process. So if you do end up in those situations and you are the new person on the team and you have had better stand-ups in the past, and your manager is the one that like runs those stand-ups, and you do have a one-on-one with them 1 week in, bring that up. It's your only chance to bring it up.
That'd be good.
And say like, hey, this stand-up felt super ineffective. In the past, I've done things this way, and it went a lot more smoothly. Again, I don't know. I don't want to like change things if you have a different reason as to why you're doing this. Maybe they're doing that because no one was paying attention to anything. But they may use that input that you just gave them to change things a little bit.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully, indeed. Similarly, say you just finished a topic, right? You just finished an issue. You're ready to move on to something else. You can either A, pick up the next thing that's on the backlog, right? Or B, something you can do is ask if anyone needs help. Like staying with our theme of being proactive. This is something a trick that I learned very recently, is most of the time no one says anything, so you're good to move on. It gives you a quick 10-minute break of peace as you wait, but just like put that message out there, like saying, hey, I just finished what I was working on. Does anyone need help with anything that I can help like you get yourself unblocked? And if anyone needs help, they'll speak up. If no one needs help, you just won yourself a free 10-minute break on the clock.
Nice.
Nothing better. Then you have time to clear your mind, like browse Twitter, do whatever you need to do to get ready to tackle the next topic on the thing. And no one is going to complain that you were there wasting 10 minutes asking if anyone needs your help. Like, not a problem at all. So it's like it's the biggest win to teamwork, I think, that I've like recently picked up. And I highly recommend everyone use this quick trick to win 10 minutes of your time back several times a day. Yeah, I'm curious to see what you think about that. Because I learned it just recently, and I thought it was like, yeah, that makes total sense. Plus, I get a free 10-minute break that I'm not complaining about.
Yeah, it's like a work-life hack. I love that. Yeah, I'm gonna try that. I mean, I think from my position, I'm a lot lower on the totem pole, if that makes sense. And so I think my help is less effective, or my potential help is much less effective where someone would actually take me up on that. But I think it's a cool idea, and I will try it out, and I will report back.
I mean, it could absolutely backfire. Someone might say, hey, I'm almost done with this feature. Can you write the unit tests? Like, it can totally like go the wrong way. But you will learn about that feature very well by writing those unit tests. You'll probably break their code in ways they weren't expecting because you're a different head on your shoulders and you think differently than them. So yes, although you might end up doing something you don't necessarily enjoy, you will learn through the process, and everyone will thank you and think better of you for being that person that does that. Especially if no one does it, you will seem like, oh, this golden hire that although you don't know very much about how to fix hacks in UIKit and you don't have 20 years of experience putting semicolons on stuff, you are more valuable in very different ways. Maybe you only get by building up all this good karma. Maybe you like squeeze down your daily hours from 8 hours to 7 hours to 6 hours because you're more valuable as a result. And no one will complain that you're like doing less, because you're doing more for everyone and you're being more effective in the process.
Yeah, I think it's cool.
Similarly, if you are stuck, ask for help. Like,
Yes.
it's one of the easiest things that like no one wants to do because it admits defeat, and admitting defeat is like something that's hardwired inside of us, that like, oh, if we admit defeat, like my whole village is gonna be taken from me. I don't know, like whatever sort of primal thing prevents us from doing this. It is not necessary anymore in today's day and age, and maybe the kids do it better. I don't know. But yeah, admit defeat, like ask for help. It will help you get unstuck, help you be more effective with your time and not like turn in circles and spiral into doom, and be able to fix what you need to fix, right?
Yep. I think it's huge. I get stuck all the time, dude. Man, I mean, I was stuck on a freaking alert controller yesterday. You know what I mean? Like, I get stuck on stuff all the time, and it is hard to admit, you know, and kind of reach out. But a lot of times, someone just has better domain knowledge of whatever it is, and let's see, take advantage of that for yourself in the present of getting unstuck. But also, you know, if they have a better solution, that's probably a bug that you don't ever have to fix because the bug doesn't exist anymore, or whatever.
Or even a workaround. Like, hey, oh, yeah, I know, alert controller, that one breaks in this particular situation. Oh, that's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah, let's not use alert controller. Let's fake it with something else. Like, that will save you tons of time just to get that confirmation, or just to indicate to the powers that be that are kind of controlling your backlog, like, hey, this is not fixable in the way that we wanted to fix it. How do we go about changing, course correcting? Because you can always course correct. You can cancel a feature. Like even one that you promise, it's something that you can do. So if you discuss that and you get others involved, then it's going to be a lot easier to do proactively than at like 5 days before shipping, when everyone thought, oh, this would be easy, and this is like the one hardest thing that is going to be impossible. And like as a final tip, and again, this is another one that I learned very recently, when you are suggesting or when you need an opinion about like how to go about solving this, you're like, hey, I don't know what to do X. Never ask an open-ended question. Always try to have like a default. Like, I'm thinking about doing it this way. Does anyone have any problems with that? What this does is, once again, like I mentioned before, where like if you ask someone like, hey, why did we decide to do it this way for the linter? And no one made a decision yet, but then as you ask that question, you manifest the reason in other people's minds out of nowhere. Like, they didn't necessarily have one, but they were asked, so they came up with one. So similar to that, if you go ahead and start a discussion with a solution in mind, then you gear the discussion towards that immediately. You've seeded that thought in everyone, and therefore you can be a lot more effective in making decisions, especially when constraints are tight. Maybe there's not a lot of time, and there's like 3 ways of doing something. You think that there's one way that's slightly better than everything else, but you're like not even 100% sure of that. That's okay. If you ask and say like, hey, I'm going to be doing it this way, anyone have any problems with that? Then like if anyone really does have any problems with that, they can bring it up. Otherwise, more often than not, they will automatically gear towards what you suggested because you've seeded that in their head, and therefore they can go ahead and acclimate to the specifics of that instead of the whole general question, which can take you wildly off course because you might not have asked the question properly, or this or that.
Yeah, or they have to like form their own opinion about it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like on the topic of like linting and code style, someone on our team had like very strong opinions about the indentation of cases in a switch statement. And so like you said, they brought up like their sort of default, like their proposed solution of like, I would like it to be like this. And I was like, I don't care. That's fine. I'll do it. So unless you have a strong opinion, like you said, just that default could be like, yeah, that sounds good to me. I don't really care what the indentation on a case is. So let's go with that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good tip. I've seen it in the wild and it definitely works.
This week's episode of Code Completion is once again brought to you by Super Easy Timer. Super Easy Timer is a quick and easy to use timer app for your Mac. It's completely text-based, so you can type in English what you want, 20 minutes or 5 p.m., hit enter, and instantly start a timer. The timer understands English text to create, update, and start a new timer. You can quickly change an active countdown, even while it's still counting down. There are simple keyboard shortcuts to reset or pause. No menus, no sliders, just use English to control your timer. We want to thank Super Easy Timer for sponsoring our show. Search for Super Easy Timer on the Mac App Store today to give it a try. So, Spencer, last week you promised us internally a mini review corner for an electricity usage meter, but you could not find it. So, like, where did this device go? We must hear the inside scoop.
Oh yes, it's such a scoop. Yes, I could not find it.
Scooped under the couch.
I looked everywhere for it that day. I was looking for like 15 minutes, could not find it. I only found it yesterday, and it was under my couch somehow. Not sure how that happened. So I've got it here. In my quest to know how much energy is either being used, being used for my devices, for which knowledge I will probably do nothing about, I have now bought a energy usage meter for just things that plug into a normal wall outlet instead of like
Nice.
a USB device. So my thing with this was to see. I finally put in a couple speakers in my ceiling, most notably in my bedroom because I listen to music when I sleep. And I've just been using this like kind of crappy sound bar that I got from Best Buy. And when you turn it on, it makes this loud beep when it connects to my phone. It just kind of sucks. So I put in these ceiling speakers and I have it just connected to an old, it's connected to an amp, but it then for the sound, it uses an Airport Express, which I think that's one of the cool things that Apple did was they made it so that Airport Expresses can be used as AirPlay 2 receivers. So I've just got an aux cable plugged in the back of that, goes in the amp, and it runs to the ceiling speaker. But with that is the amp control of like volume, turning it on and off, and everything is you need to put in like these wall, like a light switch panel with an IR remote, and it's just kind of a pain. So it has a serial port, so I made a quick Vapor app to just parse the serial output and send serial send a serial
Command
back to it to control it that way. And I just made a quick app with Swift UI on my phone to do that. But my question was like, I have to run the Vapor server on something. So what is the what is the energy usage of that? And so I have this old 2012 Mac Mini that I just threw it on, and it works great. Just plug its the serial USB cable, and so yeah, I really bought it for this, but it can be used for pretty much anything. So I don't think it has the stats on it anymore. But it's kind of cool. It'll just, you plug something into it, it'll tell the wattage. You can even like put in how much your energy costs and it will, time it and it can count and everything. I'm not using that, but it uses like 6 or 7 watts at the most, which I was pretty surprised about because it's like a 2012 Mac Mini. It's just on an Intel chip. I mean, I guess, it's just like this 2-core chip, but it's like, I think I calculated it out to be like $15 a year if I left it on all the time. So it's like, it's nothing, but it's a cool thing to just like have around and see, plug this into your TV or your, I don't know, anything really, and just see how much usage how much wattage it's bringing out. Again, the information, I don't know what I'd do with it because I'd be running the Mac Mini anyway, but I just thought it would be fun to know. So,
No, that's excellent. I just realized that I do the same exact thing with the UPSs that I have around the house. So I use them more to like see how much energy is being drawn, more than their backup capabilities. And I found that, like, I just realized that I did that once you were showing me the little meter. I'm like, that screen looks familiar of like a wattage readout. And I'm like, what was I doing to do that? And I was like, was it a light switch? Yeah, I had a light switch in the past where like when you plugged it in, it like measured like energy usage. And then I was like, oh wait, all the UPSs I littered throughout the house, they will read out like wattage, and that's the setting that I set them to because I'm more interested in that than anything.
yeah.
And yeah, like having some little device that you can go ahead and use rather than like hunking around a UPS, is definitely like a great thing. Just from like a curiosity thing. Like you said, it only costs $15 a year, so you're not going to do anything about it. If you calculated that out to $1,000 a year, you are immediately going to go ahead and be like, let's not leave this on 24/7, or let's get some other device to go ahead and have that responsibility, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, $15 a year. If it was $30 a year, I wouldn't do anything. But, if it was running at 95 watts all the time, I'd be like, not sure if this is worth it. Just looking here, it was $22 on Amazon.
Yeah.
So, kind of a cool thing just to see what's going on. And
you can use it in multiple places.
yeah, exactly. And it is not, filled with heavy lead acid batteries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's way easier than having someone outside that's like looking at the meter and trying to understand how the disc spins correlates to how many kilowatts are being used, and then timing for like 5 minutes is like, okay, have the machine on. Is it spinning faster?
Yeah, that would be a pain.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's another way of doing it. If you need to know how many kilowatt hours something is using, is to get a reading at the start of the hour and a reading at the end of the hour with a device like included or not, and you can get a rough idea as long as you don't turn on anything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that's awesome. I might want to get myself one of those, just because, as you said, like throughout the house, you just don't know how much everything is using. You have those energy saver energy. What are the yellow stick energy star? There we go. Stickers that everyone like claims. Oh, my device uses this much, and it's like, who knows if that's true or not? Who knows if that's true in your environment? Like you might be in a hotter environment or colder environment. Your fridge might be overworking or underworking. Like you really don't know. So the only way to know is to measure. And this is a great way of being in control of that. Just an extra little tiny bit.
Yeah, I I don't know why I never really thought about this, because like if you ever go up to bought a new TV. I think I said that a couple episodes ago. I didn't really realize how much like energy usage a TV takes. It's like a couple hundred watts when it's on, and it makes sense. TV gets hot. That's a lot of LEDs to push, but I never really thought about that. Then I looked up the wattage. I'm trying to find it now. I don't know if I can.
Oh, what they claimed.
Find it. No, I mean it's what they claimed. Yeah, okay, so general power consumption is 61 watts, but it's up to 203 watts, and that's like kind of a non-trivial amount. I mean, obviously you're not running it all the time, but that's kind of a lot of energy just for a TV, or at least it seems like it to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking like CRTs probably didn't take up much. Not really sure what my point of reference was. Do you think so?
Probably.
I guess powering that electron gun, maybe.
You're just like throwing electrons out. You're not even reusing them.
Good point. Yeah.
I have no clue. Don't quote me on that.
Now I have to see.
but yeah, like I think my TV uses about 100 watts. So it definitely depends on the type of TV, and what it's doing, how hot it gets. Like that's where most of the energy goes, is how hot something gets. Can it serve as a space heater? Is a good indication of, is it using too many watts? Before you go ahead and test this thing on like toasters, make sure it's like rated for for like 1500 watts,
Yeah.
because a toaster or a microwave is really gonna use up a lot of wattage for a very short amount of time. So don't think that like, oh, this is like eating into your annual energy bills. It's probably not, because you use a microwave for 30 seconds once or
Yeah.
twice a day most times, unless you have a family of like 7 kids, and then it's like probably chaos. But like think about that in terms of like before you start like panicking. I was like, oh, this thing uses so much. It's like, well, think about it per year. Like, how often do you use it? Multiply it out. And generally it's not so bad. Things like an AC are going to kill your energy bill tremendously more than anything that you plug into the wall. Or space heater. Space heater is also going to kill it.
Yeah.
Because it's on all the time, and it's not something that's turning off, and it's slowly melting your outlets without you even knowing it. So, great.
Yeah. That's actually something I was surprised about. This can do up to 1875 watts.
Yeah, so it's basically rated for the plug type.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if your
If it
device
trips
has
the
a plug
breaker,
that does
then-
not fit into that, then it's probably not made for that use case. Well, with all that out of the way, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who's at Spencer C. Curtis, that's SpencerCurtis on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñuel, that's DIMITRIBOUNIOL, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
So, hot off the presses, the EU is like deciding this is going to be how Apple needs to run their business from now on. And they've made a whole bunch of declarations that are like due in 6 months or whatever. And if you don't agree, it's gonna be like $80 billion that Apple's gonna need to pay. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we've seen similar behavior from the EU before, where they're like, "Oh, you need to change up your chargers and stuff," and that I don't really think has changed at all. But I mean, Apple has, potentially is going to like circumvent that with just not having a charging port. As far as this one goes, not really sure how they could get out of it if it does get passed. Kind of interesting to see. Yeah, I mean, like the what was it? The penalty is like 10% of their
Global revenue.
Yeah. So it's not like, hey, it's $1 million fine. Oh, look, you just made $2 million in the time it took for us to fine you. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting if it does get passed. It seems it kind of preliminary. I don't even think they've nailed down everything about it. But if it does go through, then, we'll get basic interoperability between iMessage and WhatsApp and Telegram and whatever.
So let's go through them, because I think they're all interesting, and they're all like unconnected, and it's kind of like a catch-all for everything. And I think someone pointed out, like, hey, EU, like, there are no cell phone makers in the EU anymore.
In the EU.
Like,
should
you be the one that's making all these rules? So
fair.
there's a lot to consider there. Not to mention, I think also, I forgot what I was gonna say. Any case, let's go through these one by one and see like what seems reasonable and what does not. So the first one is gatekeepers will have to ensure that users have the right to unsubscribe from core platform services under similar conditions to subscription. So I think Apple already does this for the most part. In fact, they're probably the best at this. I don't know who this is directly pointed to. So that's something that I guess they don't need to care much about.
Yeah. For the most important software, for example, web browsers, they will have to not require that software by default on installation of the operating system. So not including Safari, basically, or Apple's actually pretty good about this too, where you are actually able to, well,
Delete
delete
and
the apps
change,
at
yeah.
the very least. You don't, I mean, they probably come in iOS by default, so that wouldn't be very hard.
Yeah, but like
Although,
I don't think Apple should be forced to like boot Safari from the OS. Like, oh, you download a new thing, it's like, oh, there's no
yeah,
web browser. By the way, the App Store is also a web browser, so you can't download apps. Like, sorry.
yeah, you're gonna need an AOL CD
Yeah,
to
that goes in your
get
Lightning
online.
port, by the way.
Ooh, Lightning to CDR reader, sweet.
No, just the CD, just jam it in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the thing with this is like, does this also include app stores? Like, is this kind of where they're getting like, oh, now Apple's going to have to open up um, multiple app stores or let them install another app store? I'm not quite sure if it falls under this or not.
Yeah, I think it's mostly on the past like Microsoft and Internet Explorer kind of messaging where
Right.
like
Okay.
there is a monopoly of one web browser and everyone
Yeah.
is kind of forced to adapt to it, and therefore Microsoft is no longer allowed to offer that by default. I do think this feels a bit more overreachy than it needs to. Like as you mentioned, like Apple is doing a fairly okay job at saying like, hey, you can use other web browsers even though they're based on WebKit. They have to be based on WebKit. Like this makes no mention as far as like how things need to be based or what kind of code they are needing to use. So presumably
Well,
none of that will change.
I think no one none of the regulators even know anything about that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. The next one is ensuring the interoperability of their instant messaging services basic functionalities. Again, like iMessage interops with SMS and that interops with everything else. So I don't know what this means. Does it mean that they have to rewrite iMessage so anyone can plug into iMessage? Does this more mean that WhatsApp needs to be rewritten to like work with SMS? Does that mean that WhatsApp needs to make cell phones because SMS only works on cell phones? I don't understand.
I would assume that it's probably like without going through SMS, but like a data only protocol, general protocol that everyone uses would
just
be
for
my
the EU.
assumption. Yeah, that would
Like-
suck if they get that, but we don't.
Like, again, what are the chances? And I think these chances climb every single time this topic comes up that Apple just says, the EU is not worth it.
Yeah, I think
Like,
that's fair. I think
this-
they could totally do it.
At a certain point, it feels like there's like so much extra stuff to do for the EU that maybe they just decide it's not worth it. Hey, you want an iPhone? Go to the UK and buy one. It's not too far. The UK would probably be very happy with that like mentality. So I know it probably won't happen, but it could happen. It's probably cheaper than 10 billion or $80 billion of lost revenue recurringly. And the EU can't do anything if Apple's not doing business there, So I really don't know.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one.
All right. Allow app developers fair access to supplementary functionalities of smartphones, for example, the NFC chip. And I think that was actually something that we didn't have access to for a while Apple did. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, they make the device. They are controlling the hardware. Why should all software be able to control all the hardware that's on
I'm
the
just
device?
saying, is that, like, I couldn't remember if that was an example where, yeah. No, and that's fair.
Like, should all apps be able to control the battery like processing module on the device to like
That's
eke
fair.
out extra juice? Like, is that something that is now allowed by this? Like,
Can I overclock my A15?
yeah, like sure, like yeah, more power to the people. But is this going to be something that's good for
Yeah.
everyone, or is it just going to be like an unnecessary rule where now instead of getting extra chips that do gain more functionality over time, like the NFC chip, where it was just for Apple Pay originally, but now it can be used for all sorts of different uses, even on older devices. Like, instead of that being the case, maybe Apple just does not add any new functionality anymore,
Yeah.
because like they're
They
afraid
have
that
to
they
write
need
an
to.
SDK.
Yeah,
That, I mean,
like
yeah,
U1
that's
we can't do anything with until last year. They added like, oh,
oh
you can start communicating with this specific chip, and that was all that they like added. Maybe there's more that they're going to be adding like down the line, and maybe that allowed them to add the U1 chip very early on. Maybe like them needing to have full access to every chip on the motherboard is going to prevent them from doing that in the future. I can definitely see that scenario. Maybe I'm just pessimistic. I don't know.
well, yeah. I think that either because this is just an article or it's in its early sort of formation stage of this whole thing, it's like, where does that stop? Because you're right, like, okay, supplementary functionalities is very broad. Like, NFC chip, okay, cool, but like you said, like the battery, or can I overclock the CPU or the memory? Like, where's the line? Where does it stop, if at all? Can I control the
Yeah.
individual SMDs of the circuit board? Like, what? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
there's a
fleshed out.
reason you can't do any of that on iOS devices, is because like you're better off not touching it ever. And the
Yeah,
moment you do touch it, then you're probably gonna break your device like permanently.
yeah,
So yes, the case might be made like, oh, but I might be able to eke just about extra, like a little bit of extra information, and this is my device. I should be able to do what I want with it. And like, sure, I guess, but I don't think
I think
this
there's a
should be.
limit.
Yeah, I think there's a limit. I don't think this should be general functionality that's like open to anyone to be able to code in an app. I think if you really want to be doing this, you should be jailbreaking your device, which you can do, and doing
Yeah,
these shenanigans on your own. And it should not be a mass market like mandate to go ahead and do those things.
that's fair.
Okay, next one. Give sellers access to their marketing or advertising performance data on the platform. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I guess like basic analytics is something that Apple already does. Maybe now it has to be a whole lot more information. Maybe that has to include like customer information. I don't know. It's
Yeah, doesn't seem
ambiguous.
very Apple targeted, in my opinion. I think our
Mm-hmm.
analytics are pretty dang good.
Yep.
Inform the European Commission of their acquisitions and mergers. I think that's pretty public anyway. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like Apple buys a company and no one knows. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But now it has to. Now, even if it has nothing to do with the EU, like they want to know. I
Yeah.
guess that might be another case of like overstepping bounds. Um, and then in terms of things that they can no longer do, so Apple can no longer rank their own products or services higher than those of others, which is called self-preferencing. And I know there's like a lot of debate on like both sides of this. Like, one, this is Apple's like platform, so why should they not be able to like push stuff that they made? But likewise, if you are selling a store, if you have a store, you shouldn't be able to promote your stuff over competitors' things, namely after the fact. Like, a competitor always exists, and then you say, "Hey, look at my thing." The competitor never existed; they're way down there. So I can see like why we need rules like this. That said, like the part where it's like you can no longer do anything, I think it's like a fine line, and then just striking it in one direction kind of demotivates a company from ever like improving their platform. Which, like, yeah, I'm not sure what's the best way to go about that problem.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, and I definitely can see the appeal of completely zero preference, but also there's something to be said for uh, ranking Safari above other browsers because you know it's secure and it's going to stay up to date with any security vulnerabilities where some random other browser that, someone's just made. Well, I don't know. That's maybe a bad example because he uses WebKit. But, Apple, I don't know. I feel like from a security and kind of safety point of view, I would trust an Apple app of some type rather than someone else's. So preferencing in that way, I'm like, maybe that's a good thing. But I can also see, the downside. I don't know.
Yeah.
They can no longer reuse private data collected during one service for the preference. They can no longer reuse private data collected during a service for the purposes of another service.
So Apple cannot use anything they learned from anything to make anything else, I guess. No longer allowed. Yeah. You're too big.
That seems weird. Like, how do you enforce that? I don't know.
I wonder if any of these rules just like disappear if you no longer define yourself as a gatekeeper. Like, I wonder if there's like some stupid loophole that it's like, oh yeah, we're not a gatekeeper. Someone else is the gatekeeper and they have to abide by those rules.
Yes.
Meet our subsidiary, Apple Store Inc.
Gatekeeping. Yeah.
We are Apple. We make the software that is sold on Apple Store Inc.
Oh my gosh, dude. That would be killer.
But yeah. They can no longer establish unfair conditions for business users. Sorry, business users, that you've been treated unfairly up until now. I have been unaware of this, but
you're suffering.
Yeah, you're poor suffering. I feel like business users have like sideloading already and all that. Like it's all kind of set up for those scenarios. Like as I've mentioned previously, sideloading is a thing. It exists. Even the person who makes the alt store thinks this is like overstepping in terms of like how easy it makes it to just do whatever the hell you want. And as we discussed, like most people, if you're presented with the option of like installing Facebook via side channels, they're going to do it because they care about Facebook, having Facebook on their phone, and not about what Facebook is going to do to your phone when it no longer has any restrictions.
You're saying if it wasn't on the App Store.
Yeah, if it wasn't on the App Store.
Right.
Apple has a certain amount of like pushback from the App Store case. A lot of people make the case that the sandbox will protect everyone anyways. Like, no, the sandbox does not protect everyone. Like, you can still do crazy stuff when you're running directly on a device. That yes, you might not be able to access the user's contacts and stuff anymore, but you can still access all sorts of information about the device itself, and not everything is locked down the way you see it, and a lot of vulnerabilities start coming up and go away over time that allows more or less access to be granted. And yes, for all the faults that the App Store has, it does provide an avenue to a bottleneck of sorts to kind of fix that and prevent it from being overly abused. Not saying that they do a great job at that, and that's probably why all of this is coming to a head, but that is why it's a good solution for a lot of those problems. That said, Apple did a poor job like keeping that promise, and this is why we're in this situation, right?
Yep. Better than nothing, though.
Yeah.
This is what I was mentioning earlier. They can no longer pre-install certain software applications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, they can no longer require app developers to use certain services, particularly like payment services or identity providers, in order to be listed in app stores. So yeah, my favorite take on all of this was this one. So it's pretty simple to comply on paper. Minimo3 writes as a comment on the Mac Rumors post. All they need to do is on first boot allow users to pick either full iOS or a custom stripped down Darwin kernel with no security provisions. Your choice. You can install everything yourself, or you can get nothing. You get everything, or you install everything yourself, and you can do whatever you want. So third parties can be free to build their own window manager, file system, app store, browsers, services, etc. And yeah, you have full control at that point. You can overclock whatever you want and burn and like smell the burning performance.
Just build your own OS first.
Yeah, build your own OS first. So yeah, I largely disagree with that like take, as funny as it is, because if Apple is providing an OS, I don't think they should actively be able to prevent people from using the features of that OS. I just think, and I just don't necessarily agree that the EU should be the one that's like mandating like how and what the features that should be exposed are, because are they basically saying that by just having an NFC chip that anyone can go ahead and fake the communications that the NFC chip is like having? Like, it's easy to use NFC chips to do more or less bad things, and you can buy those devices relatively easily if you know. But if you don't know, then you're not going to be doing those things for the most part. And one of the things that cell phones have done over the past decade is make hardware that was not necessarily like in everyone's hands available in everyone's hands. And with that, there's tremendous responsibility to do it in a way that's not going to disrupt like everything else. So yeah, I'm not too sure. You don't see people carrying around like an NFC flubber to kind of fake credit card transactions on stores and stuff, because someone would raise an eyebrow. But if someone just like waves their phone and that is doing something that like breaks the communication channel that the NFC chip is using, that becomes problematic quickly. And I hate to say it, but our institutional like financial systems are not secure. And like anyone with a pessimistic mindset can think of like 100 ways to like just break the system down. And like it really scares me that just like overreaching mandates can kind of come so easily. And yeah,
I agree.
Like, case in point, if you ever write anyone a check, they have full access to your account. That's just how it is. It's easy to print checks. It's easy to go ahead and set up direct deposits. Yes, you can lock your account and only enable it on certain transactions, but that's something you need to do that's not on by default. So, like, the system is broken and it assumes everyone is a good actor. And I don't think that the world is ready to be woken up that is not the case.
Yeah, I think that's the big, like the crux of it all is like, this is like, we're pro-consumer, give them the rights to everything. But also, you know, there are people that are most definitely going to abuse that as much as we would like to assume in a sort of positive view that everyone is good. And like you said, it's just not the case. I mean,
and who's going to suffer for it? It's not going to be the ones that need any of these features. It's going to be the ones that know nothing about any of this and that are going to be fished into downloading a new OS for their phone that is mining cryptocurrency in the background that they have no clue of. Like, that is the ultimate outcome. That is like, the writing is on the wall. It happens with people with computers, and people don't trust computers anymore. Like, oh, I don't know how that thing's gonna work. Like, I am afraid to use it because it can do something that I don't understand. And those that are ever so slightly less afraid but still don't know anything end up with like a million adware things that get installed. And but the system is secure and it's sandbox. And sure, yes, it's sandbox, but it's also reading all credit card data that you enter into any website, because we now have browser extensions, and those browser extensions can do whatever they want to do. And I think that's the part that makes me want to not agree with any of these opinions that like, oh, this kind of pro-consumer stuff is good. Is I have seen direct family and friends that inadvertently suffer from like these parasitic pieces of software that are very easily installed, that on iOS are an order of magnitude harder to get installed accidentally and very easy to get rid of. Like, you don't need to do anything to get rid of them on iOS. Special, you just delete the app. You might end up with a profile that kind of like sneaks stuff in the background, but it's equally easy to get rid of that profile. And then your system is back to a safe state. Whereas on the Mac, good freaking luck resetting that. It's far easier to do a clean install, and to be sure that nothing snuck in, even in the Apple Silicon world where everything is quote unquote more secure, because any one piece of the system can become very insecure. And when that one piece is like the browser that everyone kind of uses, like, oh, just don't use Safari, use Chrome. And then there's a bunch of Chrome extensions that steal your information instead. And like, does that person need Chrome? No, they don't particularly care. They don't care about the battery life. They don't care about the performance. They don't care about the like it working for more websites, this or that. Like, they're using it for the most basic of usages, and they still have all of this stuff that gets installed. And that is the majority of people, I think. I don't think that most people are technologically inclined to understand how any of this works. And even if you are, like, you make mistakes, and you just have to end up with one of these things once, and it may be very hard for you to find out, and eventually get rid of it. So yeah, I am not a fan of most of this, like, control. I think that for the most part, it's to my benefit as a consumer that like a company like Apple exists that makes most of the trade-offs that I care about. Because I could use Android, and I could care a whole lot less of this. I can use a Freedom Phone or whatever they call them nowadays, that you can install whatever the hell you want on it. I'm not interested in that kind of in those kinds of use cases. And it pains me to see the platform that I care about being destroyed in ways that I don't agree with, because there won't be an alternative after this, because everything has to abide by these rules. So Apple, I'm mad at you for like screwing up so bad that particularly we needed to get to this point. Despite agreeing with most of your decisions, like up until very recently, like, you could have handled a lot of things more graciously. You could have said, hey, we support sideloading. You just have to do these 4 steps that are very cumbersome and already exist. Like, you can do these things right now. They just needed to like be public about it, so that way everyone can hear the word, oh, we support sideloading. You can support running your own app store. Like, yes, it's all possible. It's all stuff that they could like clamp down on. But now we are going to be forced to have a much more easy way to do whatever the hell people want. And I think that's a downside, and that's a failure on Apple to kind of get the problem back into the box that it didn't need to escape from.
That's fair.
So shame on you, EU, for not having nuance in your decisions.
Shame on you, Apple.
Yeah, like, all of this could also be solved by the people making these decisions having sensible decisions.
Yes.
But like, any sort of ambiguity can be taken both ways. Like, either a company can skirt around it because it's ambiguous in terms of like how it's being portrayed, or they can do nothing because it's so ambiguous that they're able to fine for any little thing. So there's like a whole bunch of nuance that's just kind of ignored by all of this, and it's a bit disappointing that we will have to see all of this in probably like 6 months, like very soon, as they come to get this in front of lawmakers to actually turn into law. And yeah, I won't be surprised if Apple just pulls out of the EU. And like, it's a good sized market, but it's maybe not that big of a market to them, you know?
Yeah, it's not going to tank them for sure. It'd be a big old middle finger too, man. Woo!
Yeah. And like if
insane.
Apple pulls out, then maybe Google says, yeah, maybe we'll pull out too. And then the EU is in big trouble because they just kicked out like everyone who's making cell phones. And maybe that opens it up for someone in the EU to say, oh, we're going to make a cell phone.
Sure.
And maybe that's good for the EU in general. But I hate to say a whole lot of people are just going to be buying externally. And you're going to be hurting them in the process, and you could have made better decisions that are probably more nuanced and less like sudden, that you could end up with a better scenario.
Yeah. I guess what we can take away from this is that we really quickly need to set up an iPhone importing business into the EU.
Yep.
On the down low.
On the down low.
That's good money
assuming that Apple is actually going to build.
I know.
But then we'll be the gatekeepers.
Hey, who gatekeeps the gatekeepers, man?
We'll have to
the EU, I guess.
The
yeah,
EU
dang it, that doesn't work.
Okay, bye everyone.
All right, bye.